Marcus Johnson pulled his black Jeep Wrangler into the visitor parking spot outside Sunset Hills Community Center. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the neatly maintained parking lot of the upscale neighborhood. He checked his watch, 4:30 p.m. Perfect timing for his appointment with the community outreach coordinator about the youth mentorship program. As a detective with the Metropolitan Police Department, Marcus had seen his fair share of community tensions, but he believed deeply in building bridges. Today he was here in civilian clothes, hoping to establish a program that would connect at-risk youth with positive role models. His department had been working on community relations initiatives, and this seemed like a natural fit. Marcus grabbed his folder from the passenger seat, containing program proposals and budget estimates. He had spent weeks preparing this presentation, knowing that gaining community support was crucial for the program's success. The Sunset Hills area had money and influence. If he could get them on board, other communities might follow. The parking lot was nearly empty except for a few luxury cars near the main entrance. Marcus had deliberately parked away from the building to avoid taking a prime spot, choosing instead a space near the back where several other vehicles sat. His Jeep, while well-maintained, definitely stood out among the BMWs and Mercedes that typically filled these spaces. As he walked toward the building, Marcus noticed the pristine landscaping and modern architecture that spoke to the wealth of this planned community. Everything was perfectly manicured, from the flower beds to the sidewalks. Even the parking lot lines looked freshly painted. This was the kind of neighborhood where property values mattered more than anything else, and appearances were everything. Inside the community center, Marcus was greeted by Janet Walsh, the outreach coordinator. She was a pleasant woman in her 50s who seemed genuinely interested in the mentorship program. They spent nearly 2 hours going over details, discussing potential participants and working out logistics. Janet was enthusiastic about partnering with the police department on something positive rather than punitive. The meeting went better than Marcus had hoped. Janet promised to present the proposal to the HOA board at their next meeting and seemed confident about getting approval. They scheduled a follow-up meeting for the following week, and Marcus left feeling optimistic about the program's prospects. By the time Marcus emerged from the building, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The parking lot, which had been nearly empty when he arrived, was now fuller as residents returned from work. He walked casually toward his Jeep, mentally rehearsing how he would present the day's progress to his captain. What Marcus didn't know was that about 50 yards away, concealed in an unmarked surveillance van, a joint police task force was conducting a major operation. For months, they had been investigating a sophisticated car theft ring that had been targeting luxury vehicles throughout the metropolitan area. Intelligence suggested that tonight might be when the thieves made their move on several high-end cars that had been marked in this very parking lot. Detective Sarah Shen adjusted her headset as she monitored multiple camera feeds from inside the van. Her partner, Detective Mike Rodriguez, was tracking radio communications while 2 other officers maintained watch on different angles of the parking lot. They had been in position since early morning, waiting for any sign of suspicious activity. The task force had been tracking this particular theft ring for 8 months. The criminals were sophisticated, using electronic devices to bypass modern security systems and steal vehicles within minutes. They had hit dozens of luxury cars across the city, always managing to stay one step ahead of law enforcement. Tonight felt different, though. They had solid intelligence that this location was next on the thieves' list. As Marcus approached his Jeep, completely unaware of the ongoing surveillance operation, he pulled out his keys and started to unlock the door. The unmarked van's occupants barely registered his presence, focused as they were on watching for the suspected thieves who were expected to arrive after dark. Meanwhile, across the parking lot, Margaret Whitfield was returning from her evening book club meeting. As the current president of the Sunset Hills Homeowners Association, Margaret took her responsibilities seriously, perhaps too seriously. She had a reputation in the neighborhood for being extremely particular about rules and regulations, earning her the nickname HOA Karen among residents who found her enforcement tactics overly aggressive. Margaret noticed the black Jeep immediately. It wasn't the type of vehicle she was accustomed to seeing in their upscale community, and it was parked in a visitor spot that she felt should be reserved for guests of homeowners. not random outsiders. As she watched Marcus approach the vehicle, her suspicion grew. She had never seen him before, and something about the situation didn't sit right with her. From her perspective, Marcus looked like he didn't belong in their neighborhood. His casual clothing and the older model Jeep seemed out of place among the luxury vehicles and well-dressed residents she was used to seeing. Margaret's mind immediately jumped to conclusions, assuming that Marcus must be up to no good. As Marcus got into his Jeep and started the engine, Margaret made a decision that would change everything. Instead of simply noting the license plate or asking someone at the community center about the visitor, she decided to take matters into her own hands. In her mind, she was protecting her community from what she perceived as a threat. Margaret Whitfield hurried to her silver Lexus, her mind racing with possibilities. She had seen enough crime shows to know that car thieves often worked in broad daylight, pretending to belong while they scoped out their targets. The fact that this stranger had spent hours in their community center and was now leaving in a vehicle she didn't recognize only confirmed her suspicions. As president of the HOA, Margaret felt it was her duty to protect the community's interests. Property values in Sunset Hills had risen consistently over the past decade, largely due to the neighborhood's reputation for safety and exclusivity. She wasn't about to let some criminal element threaten that carefully maintained image. Margaret followed Marcus's Jeep from a distance as he drove through the winding streets of the subdivision. She noted how he seemed to know exactly where he was going, which only fueled her suspicion. In her mind, this proved he had been casing the neighborhood, planning something sinister. She pulled out her phone and began recording video, determined to gather evidence of what she was certain was criminal activity. The irony was that Marcus was simply taking the most direct route to the main road, following the same path he had used when arriving earlier. As a police officer, he was naturally observant of his surroundings and had paid attention to the neighborhood layout during his drive in. His familiarity with the route was simply the result of good situational awareness, not criminal reconnaissance. When Marcus stopped at the neighborhood's main exit to check his phone for traffic updates, Margaret saw her opportunity. She pulled up behind him and quickly got out of her car, her phone still recording. In her mind, she was about to catch a criminal in the act and become a neighborhood hero. "Excuse me," Margaret called out loudly as she approached the Jeep. "I need to see some identification. You don't belong in this neighborhood, and I have reason to believe you're involved in suspicious activity." Marcus rolled down his window, confused by the confrontation. He had dealt with overzealous civilians before in his police work, but being on the receiving end was a new experience. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I was just visiting the community center for a meeting. Is there some kind of problem?" Margaret's voice grew more aggressive as she pointed her phone camera directly at him. "Don't lie to me. I saw you lurking around that parking lot, and I know you've been watching our cars. I'm calling the police right now unless you prove you have legitimate business here." The situation escalated quickly as Margaret became more confrontational. She demanded to see Marcus's identification, threatened to have him arrested, and continued recording everything on her phone. Marcus remained calm, explaining that he had been in a meeting about a youth mentorship program, but Margaret refused to listen to his explanations. "I don't care what lies you're telling," Margaret declared. "I know suspicious activity when I see it, and I'm not letting you leave until the police get here." As the confrontation continued, Margaret made an increasingly bold decision. She noticed that Marcus had left his Jeep running while they talked, and she convinced herself that this was further proof of criminal intent. In her mind, only someone planning a quick getaway would leave their vehicle running during a conversation. "You're not going anywhere," Margaret announced, moving toward the Jeep's driver's side. "I'm taking your keys until the police arrive." Marcus was stunned by her aggressive behavior but tried to remain professional. "Ma'am, I need you to step away from my vehicle. You have no authority to detain me or take my property." But Margaret was beyond reasoning, fueled by adrenaline and convinced she was preventing a crime. She reached through the open window and grabbed for Marcus's keys. When he pulled them away, she became even more agitated. "Fine," Margaret shouted. "If you won't cooperate, I'll make sure you can't drive away." What happened next would shock even Margaret herself. In her determination to prevent what she believed was a criminal escape, she pulled out a small knife from her keychain, originally intended for opening packages and cutting garden ties. Without fully thinking through the consequences, Margaret decided to disable the Jeep by cutting the lock mechanism on the driver's door. Marcus watched in disbelief as this seemingly respectable middle-aged woman began attacking his vehicle with a knife. "Ma'am, stop. You're damaging my property. This is illegal." But Margaret was too deep into her perceived heroic act to stop now. She worked frantically at the door lock, convinced that she was preventing a major crime. Her actions were being recorded on her own phone, which had fallen to the ground during the struggle, but she was too focused on her mission to notice. The entire confrontation was attracting attention from other residents and passers-by. Several people had stopped to watch the unusual scene, some pulling out their own phones to record. Margaret's aggressive behavior was becoming increasingly erratic as she continued her assault on the Jeep's door lock. Unknown to both Margaret and Marcus, the surveillance van from the police task force had picked up the commotion on their monitoring equipment. The sudden activity in an area they were watching closely immediately caught their attention. Detective Chen zoomed in her camera on the confrontation while Detective Rodriguez prepared to investigate. "We've got some kind of altercation near the main exit," Detective Chen reported into her radio. "Civilian-on-civilian contact possibly escalating. Should we intervene?" The task force leader made a quick decision. While their primary mission was to catch the car theft ring, they couldn't ignore a potential assault happening right under their surveillance. "Move in for a closer look but maintain cover. This could be related to our operation." As Margaret continued her attack on the Jeep's lock, she was completely unaware that trained police officers were now watching her every move. Her actions, which she believed were protecting her community, were about to bring her face to face with real law enforcement. The very people she claimed to be helping were now treating her as a potential suspect in what appeared to be an act of vandalism and attempted theft. Detective Sarah Chen crept closer to the confrontation, using parked cars as cover while maintaining visual contact with her partner in the surveillance van. What she was witnessing didn't match any of the profiles they had developed for the car theft ring they were tracking. Instead, she was watching what appeared to be a middle-aged woman attacking a vehicle with a knife while a man tried to stop her. Through her earpiece, Detective Rodriguez provided updates from the van. "The woman appears to be the aggressor here. She's the one damaging the vehicle, not the male subject. This doesn't fit our theft ring pattern at all." Margaret continued her frantic assault on the Jeep's door lock, completely consumed by her belief that she was preventing a crime. The small knife was making progress, though not in the way she had intended. Instead of simply disabling the lock, she was causing significant damage to the door panel and surrounding area. "Stop attacking my vehicle," Marcus shouted, his patience finally wearing thin. "You're committing vandalism and assault. I'm calling the police myself." "Go ahead and call them," Margaret screamed back, her face red with exertion and anger.
"They'll arrest you for whatever you were planning to do in our neighborhood."
The crowd of onlookers had grown larger, with several residents emerging from their homes to see what was causing the commotion. Among them was Janet Walsh, the community center coordinator who had met with Marcus earlier. She recognized him immediately and was shocked to see him being confronted so aggressively. "Marcus," Janet called out as she approached the scene. "What's happening here? Is everything all right?" Margaret spun around, still holding the knife, her eyes wild with adrenaline. "Janet, stay back. This man is a criminal. I caught him casing our parking lot and now he's trying to steal this vehicle." Janet looked confused as she glanced between Margaret and Marcus. "Margaret, this is Marcus Johnson. He's a police detective with the Metropolitan Police Department. We've been meeting about the youth mentorship program I told the board about." The statement hit Margaret like a physical blow. For a moment, she froze completely, the knife still in her hand, pieces of the damaged door lock scattered at her feet. "That's impossible," she whispered. "He can't be a police officer. Look at him. Look at his car." Marcus slowly reached into his jacket pocket, moving deliberately to avoid startling the clearly unstable woman who was still armed. "Ma'am, I'm going to show you my police identification now. Please put the knife down so we can resolve this peacefully." Detective Chen had heard enough. Speaking into her radio, she requested immediate backup and identified herself as law enforcement, moving to intervene in an active situation. She approached with her badge clearly visible, her weapon holstered but ready. "Police! Everyone step back," Detective Chen announced as she entered the scene. "Ma'am, I need you to drop that knife immediately and step away from the vehicle." Margaret's world began to crumble as she found herself facing a uniformed police detective while still holding a weapon she had used to attack someone's property. The realization that she might have made a terrible mistake was starting to penetrate her anger-fueled certainty. "But officer," Margaret stammered, "this man was acting suspiciously in our neighborhood. I was trying to prevent a crime." Detective Chen positioned herself between Margaret and Marcus while maintaining a clear view of both. "Ma'am, drop the knife now. We'll sort out what happened, but first I need you to disarm yourself." Marcus finally had the opportunity to present his police identification. He handed his badge and ID to Detective Chen, who examined them carefully before confirming his identity through her radio. The verification came back immediately. Detective Marcus Johnson, 8-year veteran of the Metropolitan Police Department, currently assigned to Community Relations Division. "Detective Johnson is a legitimate police officer," Detective Chen announced to the crowd. "Ma'am, you've just attacked a police officer's personal vehicle. I need you to put your hands behind your back." The reality of her situation finally hit Margaret with full force. Not only had she attacked an innocent person's vehicle, but she had assaulted the property of a police officer while he was attempting to help their community, the youth mentorship program she had just destroyed any chance of implementing, was exactly the kind of positive initiative the HOA claimed to support. Margaret dropped the knife as if it had suddenly become red hot. I didn't know," she whispered.
He looked suspicious.
"I was protecting my neighborhood." Detective Rodriguez emerged from the surveillance van, having coordinated the response with backup units that were now arriving on scene. The task force operation would have to be postponed, but they had accidentally stumbled onto a different kind of crime entirely. "Detective Johnson," Detective Chen said formally, "I apologize for what you've experienced here. We're part of a task force operation in this area, and we witnessed this entire incident. We have everything documented if you choose to press charges." Marcus looked at the damage to his Jeep, the destroyed door lock, scratched paint, and scattered debris. Then he looked at Margaret, who was now sitting on the curb with her head in her hands, finally understanding the magnitude of her mistake. The crowd of neighbors watched in stunned silence as the woman they had elected to represent their community was being questioned by police. Janet Walsh approached Marcus apologetically. "Detective Johnson, I'm so sorry about this. Margaret doesn't represent the views of our entire community. I hope this doesn't affect your willingness to work with us on the mentorship program." The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. He had come to this neighborhood hoping to build bridges between law enforcement and the community, only to become the victim of the exact kind of prejudice and assumptions that the program was designed to address. Margaret's actions had provided a textbook example of why community relations work was so desperately needed. As more police units arrived on scene, the full scope of Margaret's mistake became clear to everyone present. She had attacked the vehicle of a police officer who was trying to help their community, while being watched by an entire task force of additional officers. Her attempt to be a neighborhood hero had instead turned her into the very criminal she thought she was stopping. Word of Margaret's arrest spread through the Sunset Hills community like wildfire. By evening, every resident had heard some version of the story about their HOA president attacking a police officer's vehicle. Social media groups buzzed with discussions, debates, and increasingly embarrassing details about the incident. The task force had captured everything on their surveillance equipment. High-definition video showed Margaret's aggressive approach, her confrontation with Marcus, and her deliberate destruction of his vehicle's door lock. The footage would become crucial evidence, but it also served as an undeniable record of behavior that many residents found difficult to defend. Margaret sat in the county jail processing center, still struggling to understand how her afternoon had gone so wrong. The charges against her were serious: vandalism, assault, attempted theft, and public menacing. Each charge carried potential jail time and fines that would devastate her financially. More importantly to Margaret, her reputation in the community she had worked so hard to lead was completely destroyed. Detective Marcus Johnson spent his evening filing paperwork and dealing with insurance claims for his damaged Jeep. The door lock would need to be completely replaced, and the scratches would require professional bodywork. Beyond the financial cost, Marcus found himself questioning whether community outreach was worth the personal risk. Captain Rodriguez called Marcus into his office the next morning to discuss the incident. "Detective Johnson, I've reviewed the surveillance footage and witness statements. You handled yourself professionally throughout this entire situation. However, I need to know if you want to continue with community relations work after this experience." Marcus had spent most of the night thinking about exactly that question. "Captain, if anything, this incident proves how much this work is needed. The mentorship program could help prevent future incidents like this by building understanding between different communities and law enforcement. The task force's planned operation had to be rescheduled, but their surveillance had unexpectedly captured evidence of a different crime entirely." Detective Chen filed her report, highlighting the irony that while watching for car thieves, they had witnessed someone actually attempting to steal a vehicle, just not in the way they had expected. Margaret's arraignment was scheduled for the following Monday. Her attorney, Robert Sterling, was known throughout the city for defending white-collar criminals and suburban residents who found themselves on the wrong side of the law. He had already begun crafting a defense strategy based on Margaret's genuine belief that she was preventing a crime. "Mrs. Whitfield," Attorney Sterling explained during their first meeting, "the prosecution has very strong evidence against you. The surveillance footage shows your actions clearly, and there were multiple witnesses. Our best option might be to negotiate a plea agreement that focuses on community service rather than jail time." Margaret struggled to accept that she was now the defendant in a criminal case. "But I was trying to help. I thought I was protecting my neighborhood from a criminal. Doesn't that count for anything?" "Unfortunately," Sterling replied, "good intentions don't justify illegal actions. You attacked someone's property without cause, and that person happened to be a police officer who was legitimately in your community for official business." The Sunset Hills HOA board held an emergency meeting to address the crisis. Margaret's actions had created a public relations nightmare for the entire community. Property values could be affected if the neighborhood became known for racial profiling and aggressive confrontations with law enforcement. Board member Patricia Holmes addressed the group gravely. "We need to distance ourselves from Margaret's actions immediately. This incident could destroy everything we've worked to build in this community. We need to show that her behavior doesn't represent our values." The board voted unanimously to remove Margaret from her position as president and to issue a public apology to Detective Johnson and the Metropolitan Police Department. They also voted to invite Marcus back to present his mentorship program, hoping to demonstrate their commitment to positive community relations. Janet Walsh contacted Marcus personally to extend the board's invitation. "Detective Johnson, I know this is asking a lot after what happened, but the board would like you to know that Margaret's actions don't represent our community's values. We're more committed than ever to making the mentorship program work." Marcus appreciated the gesture but remained cautious. "Ms. Walsh, I'm willing to continue discussions about the program, but we need to address the underlying issues that led to this incident. The program can't succeed if some community members view police officers with suspicion based on their appearance or the vehicles they drive." The incident had attracted media attention throughout the metropolitan area. Local news stations covered the story extensively, focusing on the irony of an HOA president attacking a police officer's vehicle while other officers watched. The story became a cautionary tale about making assumptions based on appearance and taking vigilante action without proper authority. Margaret's neighbors were divided in their response to the incident. Some supported her, believing she had acted with good intentions even if her methods were wrong. Others were embarrassed by her behavior and worried about how it reflected on their entire community. Mrs. Eleanor Davidson, who lived next door to Margaret, expressed the conflicted feelings many residents shared. "Margaret has always been dedicated to our neighborhood, but what she did was completely wrong. That poor police officer was just trying to help us and she treated him like a criminal. It's heartbreaking for everyone involved." The local NAACP chapter issued a statement calling the incident an example of racial profiling that had escalated to criminal behavior. They demanded sensitivity training for all HOA board members and requested a formal investigation into whether Margaret's actions were motivated by racial bias. Marcus found himself in the uncomfortable position of being at the center of a community controversy. While he appreciated the support from many residents and organizations, he didn't want his experience to become a political issue that might interfere with his police work or the mentorship program's goals. As Margaret's court date approached, She faced the possibility of up to 2 years in prison if convicted on all charges. The surveillance footage made denial impossible, so her defense team focused on arguing for reduced charges and community service. They hoped her previous community involvement and lack of criminal history would earn her leniency from the judge. The incident had changed everyone involved in ways they were still discovering. Marcus continued his community outreach work, but with a heightened awareness of the challenges he might face. Margaret prepared for a legal battle that would determine her future, while the Sunset Hills community grappled with uncomfortable questions about prejudice, privilege, and the consequences of acting on unfounded assumptions. The courtroom was packed on the morning of Margaret Whitfield's hearing. Local media representatives filled the press section, while Sunset Hills residents occupied most of the public seating. The case had become a symbol of larger issues about racial profiling, community vigilantism, and the consequences of making assumptions based on appearance. Judge Patricia Clearwater had reviewed all the evidence beforehand, including the surveillance footage that clearly showed Margaret's aggressive actions. The case was straightforward from a legal perspective, but the judge understood the broader social implications that had drawn so much public attention. Margaret entered the courtroom wearing a conservative navy suit, her usual confidence replaced by visible nervousness. The past month since her arrest had been the most difficult period of her life. She had lost her position as HOA president, faced mounting legal bills, and endured constant scrutiny from neighbors and media. Detective Marcus Johnson was present to provide testimony if needed, though the surveillance evidence made his account largely redundant. He had mixed feelings about seeing Margaret again. While he remained angry about the attack on his vehicle and the assumptions she had made about him, he also felt somewhat sorry for how completely her life had unraveled. Attorney Robert Sterling approached the bench with a plea agreement he had negotiated with the prosecutor's office. Margaret would plead guilty to vandalism and disturbing the peace, while the more serious charges of attempted theft and assault would be dropped. In exchange, she would serve 6 months of house arrest, complete 200 hours of community service, pay restitution for the vehicle damage, and attend mandatory diversity training. Your Honor, Sterling addressed the court, my client recognizes that her actions were wrong and is prepared to accept responsibility. Mrs. Whitfield acted out of a misguided desire to protect her community, but she understands that her methods were inappropriate and illegal. The prosecutor, District Attorney Jennifer Walsh, emphasized the seriousness of Margaret's actions. Your Honor, the defendant attacked a police officer's vehicle while he was conducting legitimate community outreach business. Her actions were based on unfounded assumptions and represent exactly the kind of vigilante behavior that our justice system exists to prevent. Judge Clearwater addressed Margaret directly before accepting the plea agreement. Mrs. Whitfield, your actions that day were not just illegal, they were harmful to the very community relationships that Detective Johnson was trying to build. You claim you were protecting your neighborhood, but instead you damaged its reputation and potentially destroyed important police community programs. Margaret stood to address the court, her voice barely above a whisper. Your Honor, I accept full responsibility for my actions. I was wrong to assume Detective Johnson was a criminal based on his appearance and vehicle. I was wrong to take matters into my own hands instead of calling proper authorities. I was wrong to damage his property and treat him with disrespect. I can only hope that my community service and the changes I make in my life can somehow make amends for the harm I've caused. The judge accepted the plea agreement and sentenced Margaret according to its terms. The house arrest would be monitored electronically, and her community service would be performed at a local community center that served primarily minority populations. The diversity training would be conducted by the same organization that provided cultural sensitivity training for police officers. Outside the courthouse, Margaret faced a crowd of reporters and protesters. Some community members had come to support her, believing she had been treated too harshly for actions motivated by good intentions. Others held signs demanding accountability for racial profiling and calling for justice for Detective Johnson. Margaret's brief statement to the media was carefully prepared by her attorney. I want to apologize publicly to Detective Johnson, to the Metropolitan Police Department, and to my community for my actions. I am committed to learning from this experience and working to rebuild the trust I have damaged. Detective Johnson declined to speak with reporters, but the police department issued a statement expressing satisfaction with the legal outcome and emphasizing their continued commitment to community outreach programs. Despite this incident, the Sunset Hills HOA moved quickly to repair relationships with law enforcement. They formally invited Detective Johnson to present his mentorship program at their next board meeting and established a new policy requiring board approval before any resident could confront suspected criminals or trespassers. Janet Walsh, who had been elected as the new HOA president, worked diligently to restore the community's reputation. "We want Detective Johnson and the entire police department to know that Margaret's actions don't represent our community's values. We're committed to building positive relationships with law enforcement and supporting programs that benefit all our neighbors." The task force that had witnessed Margaret's attack eventually completed their original mission, successfully apprehending the car theft ring they had been tracking. The irony that they had captured footage of an actual vehicle attack while waiting for car thieves wasn't lost on the investigators involved. Margaret began her house arrest the following week, wearing an electronic ankle monitor that tracked her movements. The reality of her situation was sobering. She could only leave her home for work, court-ordered community service, and essential errands like grocery shopping and medical appointments. Her community service assignment at the Martin Luther King Jr. Community Center proved to be more challenging than Margaret had expected. Working alongside people from diverse backgrounds forced her to confront her own unconscious biases and assumptions. The center's director, Reverend David Thompson, made it clear that Margaret's service would involve real work, not symbolic gestures. "Mrs. Whitfield," Reverend Thompson explained during her orientation, "you're here because your actions showed a fundamental lack of understanding about people who don't look like you or drive the same cars you're used to seeing. Your job here is to listen, learn, and work alongside community members who might challenge your preconceptions." Margaret's first assignment was helping with an after-school tutoring program for elementary students. Many of the children came from single-parent homes and low-income families, situations that Margaret had never directly encountered despite living only a few miles away. The experience was humbling and educational in ways she hadn't anticipated. Meanwhile, Detective Johnson continued his community outreach work with renewed determination. The incident with Margaret had actually strengthened his resolve to build better police-community relationships. He understood that changing deeply ingrained attitudes would require patience, persistence, and programs that brought people together across racial and economic divides. The mentorship program eventually launched in 3 different communities, including Sunset Hills. Young people from various backgrounds were paired with adult mentors from law enforcement, creating relationships that benefited both the youth and the officers involved. The program's success became a positive legacy, emerging from what had started as a deeply troubling incident. Margaret's journey through the legal system and community service was covered periodically by local media, serving as an ongoing reminder about the consequences of racial profiling and vigilante behavior. Her experience became a case study used in diversity training programs and community relations workshops throughout the region. 6 months later, Margaret Whitfield's house arrest finally ended, but her journey of self-reflection and community service was far from over. The electronic ankle monitor was removed on a Tuesday morning, marking the end of one phase of her legal obligations, but the beginning of a deeper personal transformation that would continue for years to come. Margaret had completed over half of her required community service hours at the Martin Luther King Jr. Community Center. What had started as court-ordered punishment had evolved into something she genuinely valued. Working with children and families from different backgrounds had opened her eyes to perspectives she had never considered during her years of HOA leadership. 10-year-old Jasmine Williams had become particularly special to Margaret during the tutoring program. The bright, curious girl reminded Margaret of herself at that age, full of questions and eager to learn. Jasmine's mother worked 2 jobs to support her family, something that gave Margaret new appreciation for the challenges facing many families in her city. "Miss Margaret," Jasmine asked one afternoon while they worked on math homework, "why did you get in trouble with the police?" "My mom said you were mean to a police officer." The question forced Margaret to confront her actions in terms a child could understand. "I made a big mistake, Jasmine. I thought someone was doing something wrong when they weren't. I didn't take time to find out the truth before I acted, and I hurt someone who was actually trying to help people." Reverend Thompson had watched Margaret's evolution with careful attention. Her initial defensiveness and self-pity had gradually given way to genuine remorse and a desire to understand the perspectives of people she had previously dismissed or ignored. The transformation wasn't complete, but it was real and meaningful. "Margaret," Reverend Thompson said during one of their monthly check-ins, "you came here angry and resentful about your punishment. But I see someone now who's beginning to understand why your actions were so harmful. That understanding is the foundation for real change." Detective Marcus Johnson had also undergone his own transformation during the months since the incident. The mentorship program had exceeded all expectations, with young people from 3 different communities building positive relationships with police officers. The success had earned him a commendation from the police department and recognition from community organizations. The program had even attracted federal attention, with Department of Justice officials visiting to study the model for potential replication in other cities. Marcus found himself presenting at law enforcement conferences about building trust between police and communities. Using his own experience as both an example of the challenges and the possibilities for positive change, Marcus occasionally thought about Margaret and wondered how she was handling her legal consequences. He had chosen not to follow media coverage of her case, preferring to focus on positive initiatives rather than dwelling on the negative incident. However, he did receive updates from Janet Walsh about the changes in Sunset Hills since Margaret's removal from the HOA board. The new HOA leadership had implemented several policy changes designed to prevent future incidents. They established clear protocols for addressing suspicious activity that required calling proper authorities rather than confronting individuals directly. They also created a community relations committee focused on building positive relationships with local law enforcement and service organizations. Margaret's diversity training sessions had been more challenging than her community service work. Facilitated by Dr. Angela Hayes, a professor of social psychology who specialized in implicit bias, the sessions forced Margaret to examine her own unconscious prejudices and the assumptions that had led to her confrontation with Marcus. "Margaret," Dr. Hayes explained during one particularly difficult session, "you acted on stereotypes that many people in your position share. The difference is that you acted on them in a way that caused real harm. Understanding how these biases develop and how to counteract them is essential for preventing future incidents." The training included role-playing exercises, case studies, and discussions with people from different racial and economic backgrounds. Margaret learned about microaggressions, systemic inequality, and the daily experiences of people who face discrimination that she had never recognized or understood. 1 year after the incident, Margaret completed her final hours of community service. The Martin Luther King Jr. Community Center held a small ceremony recognizing volunteers who had contributed significant service hours. Margaret was surprised to find herself genuinely emotional as she said goodbye to the children and families she had worked with. Jasmine Williams had improved her reading level by 2 grades during the time Margaret tutored her. Her mother, Patricia Williams, approached Margaret after the ceremony with unexpected words of gratitude. "Miss Margaret, I know you didn't choose to come here initially, but you made a real difference for Jasmine. She talks about you all the time and says you help her believe she can do anything." The conversation with Patricia Williams crystallized something important for Margaret. Her community service hadn't just been about fulfilling legal obligations. It had connected her with real people whose lives were enriched by genuine care and attention. She realized that her previous community involvement as HOA president had been about maintaining property values and enforcing rules, not about actually serving people. Detective Johnson received an unexpected letter 6 months after Margaret's community service ended. Written in careful handwriting on simple stationery, the letter was Margaret's personal apology. Not the carefully crafted legal statement her attorney had prepared, but her own words expressing genuine remorse for her actions and assumptions. "Detective Johnson," the letter read, "I know no apology can undo the harm I caused you, but I wanted you to know that I understand now how wrong my actions were. My community service and training have taught me that my assumptions about you were based on prejudice I didn't even recognize in myself. I hope your mentorship program continues to succeed, and I hope that other people can learn from my mistakes without causing the pain I caused you." Marcus was moved by the sincerity of Margaret's letter. He had seen many apologies during his police career, most motivated by legal strategy rather than genuine remorse. Margaret's letter felt different, written by someone who had genuinely grappled with her actions and their underlying causes. The incident had become a case study used in police academies and community relations training programs throughout the region. The surveillance footage, with identifying information removed, was used to illustrate how quickly situations could escalate when civilians took vigilante action based on unfounded assumptions. Captain Rodriguez often used the case when training new officers about community relations. This incident shows why building trust between police and communities is so important, he would tell recruits. When community members don't trust or understand law enforcement, they sometimes take matters into their own hands with disastrous results for everyone involved. Margaret eventually found new ways to contribute to her community that reflected her changed perspective. She volunteered with literacy programs, supported local food banks, and even helped coordinate community events that brought together residents from different neighborhoods. Her approach to community involvement had fundamentally changed from enforcement and exclusion to service and inclusion. The Sunset Hills neighborhood had also evolved in positive ways since the incident. Property values remained strong, but the community's reputation improved as residents embraced more inclusive attitudes and genuine partnership with local law enforcement. The mentorship program had enrolled several young people from the area, creating connections that benefited both the youth and the officers involved. 2 years after their confrontation, Margaret and Marcus encountered each other at a community event celebrating the success of the youth mentorship program. The meeting was awkward but respectful, with Margaret expressing her continued remorse and Marcus acknowledging her efforts to make amends through community service and personal growth. "Detective Johnson," Margaret said quietly, "I know I can never fully make up for what I did to you, but I want you to know that your example of professionalism and forgiveness has been an inspiration for my own journey of change." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Mrs. Whitfield, we all make mistakes. What matters is what we learn from them and how we choose to grow. Your community service work speaks well of your commitment to doing better." The incident had taught everyone involved important lessons about assumptions, prejudice, and the power of genuine human connection to overcome mistrust and misunderstanding. Margaret's transformation from an aggressive HOA enforcer to a thoughtful community volunteer demonstrated that people could change when confronted with the consequences of their actions and given opportunities to understand different perspectives. The youth mentorship program continued to thrive, expanding to include participants from 8 different communities. Detective Johnson was promoted to sergeant and given increased responsibilities for community outreach initiatives. The program's success had proven that positive police-community relationships were possible when built on mutual respect, understanding, and genuine commitment to serving all community members. Margaret's story became a reminder that good intentions weren't enough to justify harmful actions, but that genuine remorse and commitment to change could lead to personal growth and meaningful community contribution. Her journey from prejudice to understanding offered hope that even deeply ingrained biases could be overcome through education, exposure to different perspectives, and the humility to acknowledge when one's actions have caused harm to others.